On Australian Story, then Four Corners, Media Watch and Q&A.
Tonight, the death toll rises at Newmarch House. A 15th resident dies at the Sydney aged care home. Good evening, I'm Juanita Phillips. This is ABC News. The return to school gathers pace. The Premier opens the door to all students attending 5 days a week by the end of May. Out of isolation, NRL teams reunite as they eye a return to training. And John Barilaro stays put. The Deputy Premier decides not to run in Eden Monaro. A 15th resident has died after testing positive to coronavirus at the Newmarch aged care home in Western Sydney. Anglicare said it was saddened by the death. The elderly man had no immediate family. Earlier, it was announced that a 7-year-old boy had been diagnosed after attending a Sydney primary school. The Premier is warning parents to brace for more infections as schools return.
For the families of the Newmarch House residents, it was the news they've come to dread.
It's horrible. My heart goes out to any extended family he has. It's been a constant thing every day here.
Anthony Bowe's mother was one of the first to test positive. He wants to pull her out once she's clear of the virus.
I'm hoping she'll come home for a while until this settles down and then she can make a decision about her long-term future.
An infection control specialist has been brought in to work out how the virus is still spreading. Staff are being tested daily. The Health Services Union says this should be happening across the board.
It makes it safe for the worker, it makes it safe for the facility, it makes it safe for the patient or the resident.
At Warragamba Public School, the gates remained locked this morning. A 7-year-old boy had been attending school when he developed flu-like symptoms.
It was a bit of a shock because we're a bit of a small community up here, so we weren't really expecting to hear of a case up here.
At this stage, it's not known how the boy caught the virus.
The school is being closed today and the usual public health contact tracing will occur, and we'll also be aiming to identify a source for that case.
And I say to parents and teachers and school communities, this is likely to occur on a more regular basis when schools go back.
Penrith has been added to the list of hotspot suburbs for testing. From the very young to the very old, the events unfolding here have shown that nothing can be taken for granted. And behind the scenes, the government has been busy preparing for the worst-case scenario. Masks, gloves and surgical gowns are being stockpiled at warehouses in secret locations. $1 billion insurance policy against any eventuality. Ursula Malone, ABC News, Sydney.
Moves to get students back to school have been dramatically ramped up. Initially, the Premier's plan was to have classes operating at full capacity by the end of this term. Now she's aiming for all kids to be back at school full-time by the end of this month, and Year 12s are the priority.
Gabe Joseph has big goals, a double degree in commerce and law. But the Year 12 student fears learning from home is jeopardising those plans.
It's loud, it's noisy, it's really hard.
The Premier today delivered some relief. Public high schools are now encouraged to offer extra face-to-face teaching from next week to HSC students.
And that looks like it will happen in the vast majority of high schools.
Devastatingly for Gabe, his high school isn't in the majority. The college says it can't offer more than 1 day a week on campus for Year 12 students because that would compromise their safety and the safety of staff. Gabe says the HSC won't be credible unless all students are catered for equally.
The more kids that are going back to school and the more time that we're losing not going back to school and not having this valuable face-to-face learning, I feel more at a disadvantage.
The Premier is also speeding up the official return to school for younger children.
So if the first 2 weeks go well, there's no reason why we can't expedite all students having full-time face-to-face teaching by the end of May. So that's our target.
Aidan Lindley was back at school today.
I decided that Aiden was probably struggling a little bit with the tasks that were set, particularly the reading, and he needed some more one-on-one help with that.
But it's not reading Aiden was most looking forward to.
Seeing my friends.
The Lindley family isn't alone. School attendances have been increasing slowly but steadily.
We don't know how to teach them because they only want to play. So it's good they're coming to school.
He's trying to teach him how to read books very hard. He's not interested.
Teachers do their job excellent, so we can't replace them.
And now there's some certainty parents won't have to play substitute teacher for much longer. Rosie King, ABC News, Sydney.
The news that 2 schools in Sydney and Melbourne had to be shut down over the weekend has again triggered fears about what might happen once kids return en masse. Our education reporter Connor Duffy takes a look at the data and science driving the decisions.
Phil Beresford lived a parent's coronavirus nightmare 3 times. 2 of his children, Natalie and Liam, had mild symptoms, but it was a different story for 15-year-old Dylan.
That made for a fairly quick trip into town to the Children's Hospital, and they took x-rays. I will say that during that time I got a little bit higher level of anxiety than normal.
Phil kept his children home from school while awaiting their test results, saving exposure to 1,600 other youngsters. But he soon caught the virus himself. The federal government's health advice has been consistent throughout, that schools are low risk and classrooms are safe. States have also been quick to close down schools where outbreaks occur. New South Wales is the only state to have done a major study into schools. Between the 5th of March and 3rd of April, there were a total of 20 cases from 15 different schools. 11 of the cases were students, 9 were teachers. But here's the important thing. 18 of the cases originated outside the school. Just 2 students were found to have caught the virus in the classroom.
We think that for some reason, children are getting less severely affected by this disease.
In South Australia, 8 schools have reported cases. On just one occasion at Unley High School was the virus passed from a teacher to a student.
We often measure the viral load in people who have been infected, and it seems like we don't have a clear answer of at what viral load can a person transmit the disease to others.
But schools are not without risks. One of New Zealand's biggest clusters started there. A teacher first tested positive on March 22. The school closed immediately, but the virus had already spread. There are now 46 students and staff who tested positive. 94 people with connections to the school have been infected so far. It's become New Zealand's 2nd largest outbreak.
It doesn't take much to become exposed and catch the virus. That same sort of vigilance needs to be maintained as they progress through opening the schools up.
Warnings from classrooms near and far. Connor Duffy, ABC News.
The creation of a Trans-Tasman travel bubble will be on the agenda when New Zealand's Prime Minister joins Australia's National Cabinet meeting tomorrow. Jacinda Ardern has been invited by Prime Minister Scott Morrison to attend the meeting with state and territory leaders. Australia and New Zealand have had great success in suppressing COVID-19, and that's prompted the push to reopen borders exclusively between the 2 countries.
Both our countries' strong record on fighting the virus has placed us in the enviable position of being able to plan the next stage in our economic rebuild and to include Trans-Tasman travel and engagement in our strategy.
Ms Ardern says it's likely to be months before the so-called bubble is in place. Well, the economic impact of the pandemic will be felt for years to come, particularly when it comes to employment. Australia's jobless rate is tipped to soar to 10%, and among the hundreds of thousands of workers sacked or stood down are apprentices. There are fears that could have a long-lasting impact on skilled worker numbers into the future. Here's political reporter Jade McMillan.
A love of cars drove Charlotte Graham towards a career as a mechanic. But 3 years into her apprenticeship, it stalled.
I've been placed on stand down as of 3rd of April, I think it was, sometime at the start of last month. And I've just since then been at home on indefinite leave.
Charlotte is eligible for the federal government's $1,500 a fortnight JobKeeper subsidy and is hopeful of returning to work soon as business picks up. But for many other apprentices, the future is a lot less certain. Group training organisation WPC Group has had around 150 apprentices sent back by host employers who can no longer keep them on.
Apprentices particularly are vulnerable to this economic shock. There's less experienced members of the workforce. They're often, sadly, the first to go. And if past history is a guide, the last to be rehired.
The number of apprenticeship positions being advertised dropped by nearly 75% between January and April this year. And there are fears the economic uncertainty could deter young people from completing their trades or starting new ones.
Apprenticeships take about 3 to 4 years. So if there's an impact now, it affects the pipeline of apprentices. It means we have long-lasting impacts.
Apprentice chef Varvaneh Skilbeck is worried about the future of the hospitality industry and is thinking of switching to nursing instead.
Pretty sad, to be honest. You don't want to have to change industries before you've even had a chance to start.
As well as JobKeeper, the government is spending $1.3 billion on a 50% apprentice wage subsidy for small businesses, although employers need to choose between the two. It says that program has already supported more than 15,000 apprentices, and more help will be considered as the full impact of coronavirus becomes clear. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Canberra.
Australia has recorded the biggest jump in new cases since the middle of April, but just one location accounted for almost all of them. With the details, here's our analyst Casey Briggs.
The ACT is no longer coronavirus-free. It went 4 straight days without a single active infection, but the Territory has today recorded 1 new case. We're seeing low levels of infection right across the country, except in Victoria. 19 of its new cases today linked to 1 single abattoir in a cluster that's now been associated with 34 cases. We're likely to see this from time to time, a single case sparking an outbreak. We've seen it in Sydney aged care homes and we've seen it in Tasmania. These are all of the cases the Tasmanian government's linked to a single outbreak in the northwest of the state. Just a single case in mid-March, most likely a Ruby Princess cruise ship passenger, has turned into more than 100. This is the day the Tasmanian government shut 2 hospitals in a bid to try and contain the spread. The good news is the testing rate is really picking up in the last few days, which means it's more likely we'll be able to catch outbreaks earlier in the piece. We're seeing that in Victoria. Just yesterday, 13,000 people swabbed in a single day. We're living in unprecedented times. And if you're sick of hearing that word, I don't blame you. Search traffic for the word unprecedented worldwide is unprecedented.
The US Secretary of State says there's, quote, enormous evidence that coronavirus originated in a Chinese lab, but is yet to provide the proof. He says China did everything it could to mislead the world about the true danger of what was happening in Wuhan. President Donald Trump also ramped up the attack, saying China made a horrible mistake and tried to cover it up. North America correspondent David Lipson reports.
This idyllic scene is what New York health officials have feared.
I've been waiting for this a long time. I haven't been out the house in over a month.
Stay-at-home orders no match for the onset of spring.
This is the nicest weather we've seen this year. People are going to be out.
Across town, a paramedic from Colorado who came to New York to help is being mourned. States that are still closed are facing more protests and more resolve from governors who are putting health first.
Sadly, we had far more people die yesterday in Maryland than we had protesters.
The Trump administration's top diplomat has hardened his position on who's to blame.
We can confirm that the Chinese Communist Party did all that it could to make sure that the world didn't learn in a timely fashion about what was taking place.
And he echoed the president's claim about the pandemic's origin, saying there's enormous evidence coronavirus came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Remember, China has a history of infecting the world, and they have a history of running substandard laboratories.
That's at odds with Australia's Prime Minister, who said he'd seen no hard evidence the virus started in a lab. President Trump has said if China was found to be knowingly responsible, there would be consequences.
We're going to be given a very strong report as to exactly what we think happened. And I think it'll be very conclusive.
Is there any suggestion that it was anything nefarious or that it was just a mistake?
So I think they made a horrible mistake, and they didn't want to admit it.
It's hard to know whether all of this is aimed at distracting from America's failures, as China has claimed, or whether the US is planning some form of punitive action. Intelligence officials here have determined the virus was not man-made, but they're yet to rule out an accident in a lab. David Lipson, ABC News, Washington.
There are worrying signs the pandemic is starting to take hold in India. The country of 1.3 billion has so far escaped a large-scale breakout. But yesterday, the country recorded its biggest one-day rise in cases so far. There are now 42,000 cases in India and nearly 1,400 deaths. Police in India are taking a slightly different approach to many other countries, though. They're dressing as the virus to warn people about the risks and even scaring the kids a little. As Italy prepares to emerge from its 8-week lockdown today, grief is turning to anger in the northern Italian region of Lombardy. It remains one of the worst affected regions in the world, accounting for almost half of Italy's coronavirus deaths. And the recriminations have already begun. Europe correspondent Samantha Hawley reports.
In Italy's north, they died in the thousands, leaving an unbearable toll.
It was a terrible period. It was a terrible period.
In the city of Cremona, ICU doctors did all they could.
There were a lot of people, like a war. We were in a war.
The hardest moment was when were the young patients that I couldn't help. The young patients that are died.
The province of Bergamo was worst hit, with more than 2,200 deaths. Amid the grief, there's anger and threats of legal action amid criticism the lockdown should have come far sooner. 81-year-old Giancarlo Gargantini died on March the 7th after initially being refused hospital admission. His daughter wants justice.
I will be making a complaint to the prosecutor's office. I have already contacted a lawyer and I will never stop fighting.
Thai woman Vatani Suvamol has called Bergamo home for 2 decades.
Anger, disappointment, we want answers. Too many people died and too many people risked their lives.
Carlo Chiodi lost his mother and father.
It's impossible to let go of this. There's something not right. I want justice. Something.
One of the worst affected regions in the world is on a long road to recovery. Samantha Hawley, ABC News.
Still to come this hour, how hard will the coming recession hit the property market?
It's a pretty scary thought not being able to pay your mortgage.
Generally what we'd say is around about 15% fall in house prices over the next 12 months.
Also, Dr Norman Swan on the likelihood of a second wave of coronavirus cases over winter. That's coming up.
The Deputy Premier, John Barilaro, has pulled out as a potential candidate for the federal seat of Eden-Monaro. The Nationals leader had long held ambitions to make the switch to federal politics. His decision to stay put means the state's Transport Minister, Liberal Andrew Constance, is likely to announce his candidacy tomorrow. State political reporter Ashley Raper.
He was poised to make a play for federal parliament, but John Barilaro will stay put as Deputy Premier.
The polling showed that I could win, but sometimes in this game you let ego get in the way of good decisions, and I've got to make the best decision for me, my family, for the people of New South Wales, more importantly for the people of Eden-Monaro.
Mike Kelly's retirement as the Labor member for Eden-Monaro has left an opening, and John Barilaro had been fanning speculation that he was the person to fill the spot, until push came to shove.
I'm comfortable being the Deputy Premier and the state leader, and I've got a lot to contribute.
He'll remain a powerful force in the coalition partnership that's at times challenging for the Premier.
Extraordinarily pleased, very pleased. I'll let him speak for himself, but I'm very pleased that he's staying part of our strong team in New South Wales.
Another senior member of the team is tipped to go instead. The The Transport Minister Andrew Constance, who steered his South Coast community through the bushfire crisis. He's likely to announce tomorrow that he'll contest the marginal seat for the Liberals.
The chances of the coalition winning it is improved by having a Liberal run. Eden Monaro is not National Party territory traditionally.
I'm a fan of Andrew Constance. I think Andrew Constance can win the seat.
First, though, he'll have to get past the other potential Liberal candidate, federal Senator Jim Molan, and then faced off against Labor's candidate, the Bega Valley Mayor Kristy McBain. So what does this all mean for the New South Wales government? Well, the Premier will have to continue to contend with a coalition troublemaker in John Barilaro. But you'll also have to manage an upheaval. If Andrew Constance goes, that'll prompt a major reshuffle and a by-election in his state seat. Ashley Raper, ABC News, Sydney.
A controversial redevelopment in Sydney's northwest has been given the green light 4 days after the state government announced an expedited approvals program. Construction of the Ivanhoe estate at Macquarie Park will begin in October. Last week, the government announced it would fast-track some assessments to help the economy during the coronavirus crisis. The local mayor fears the acceleration resulted in corners being cut.
It seems very predetermined. It was announced 4 days ago. The minister was at pains to say, look, it doesn't mean it's going to be approved, it doesn't mean it's going to be approved, and then all of a sudden 4 days it was.
The government says the project has been in the planning system since 2018. The key to eventually declaring Australia COVID-free may lie in our sewage. Sydney scientists are developing a test that detects the virus in wastewater. They say it's faster and screens more people than other tests.
Even in the COVID crisis, some business never slows.
This is Sydney's largest wastewater treatment plant.
Sewerage, a service all of us use. So what better way to screen the masses? Scientists are using machines like this to collect samples and in their labs testing them for COVID-19.
We can detect the remnants of the virus. So it doesn't tell us if it's alive or dead, but it tells us the virus is somewhere in the community.
And quickly. Researchers say even before patients develop symptoms, traces of the virus pass their bodies and end up in sewage.
It's not dangerous at all. Once it reaches the wastewater system, it's no longer viable, so it's not actually infectious.
Ships, planes, whole suburbs. The test can be deployed anywhere wastewater is collected.
It's actually in many ways easier to use these techniques in small towns because small towns usually have one sewage treatment plant that drains the whole town.
Looking at areas where the virus has potentially been eradicated and also where there may be outbreaks that haven't yet been picked up by clinical testing.
Scientists have been sampling our wastewater for decades. It's used to detect drug use and diseases like polio. It's hoped the test will one day help Australia declare itself coronavirus-free. The trial is well underway. Plans are in the works to start testing within a month. Jessie Dorset, ABC News, Sydney.
In finance news, 500,000 borrowers are getting loan repayment relief from the banks, and more than 1 million have applied to take out some of their super. Here's Alan Kohler.
Here's why the property market isn't collapsing yet. 307,000 people have been let off their mortgage repayments, so they don't have to sell the house having lost their job. The total amount of repayments that the banks have foregone, according to the Australian Bankers Association, including business loans and credit cards, is $6.8 billion. Also, 1 million super fund members have now applied for a total of $8.38 billion of their super, which is an average of a bit more than $8,000, which is less than the maximum allowed in early release of $10,000 this year. And the other bit of coronavirus recession news today was that consumer spending has lost all of the momentum gained from the stimulus package in late March. The index is based on actual spending by 250,000 people, so pretty solid data. On the share market today, Westpac released its horrible half-year result. Profit down 62%, $1.9 billion added to loan impairment provisions, and the dividend deferred. Westpac's share price went up though because it wasn't as bad as expected, and the banks, retailers and CSL pulled the index up by 1.2%. Afterpay shares jumped nearly 25% because the Chinese online commerce giant Tencent has bought 5% of the company. The US market fell quite heavily on Friday, which was May the 1st, prompting everyone to remember the old saying, sell in May and go away. And here's why people say that. The average performance on the US market from May to October is in orange on the graph. And from November through April, it's blue, which is when all the money is made on the share market, on average. The Australian dollar has slid back down below 64 US cents. And finally, it's Star Wars Day, May the 4th. So here's a chart of the revenue totals for the biggest box office franchises. Star Wars has just lightsabered James Bond. And that's finance.
The Melbourne Storm will move to the New South Wales border town of Albury on Wednesday to begin training. The NRL season is due to resume later this month. All 16 clubs have met for the first time in 6 weeks to run through the strict biosecurity measures they'll need to follow.
The Melbourne Storm at home for now, but soon to set up camp in the New South Wales border town of Albury.
Should players or staff wish to head home during a day or two off, then they've got the ability to do so.
The team will have sole use of an accommodation venue and train at a local rugby league ground.
The gates will be locked. We have to operate under what's called green zones.
Storm players met in Melbourne this morning for a crash course on the tough new biosecurity measures they'll now need to follow. They also thanked the Warriors, who've left family in New Zealand to effectively save this year's rugby league season.
Just really appreciate it, and hope you guys enjoy quarantine. I know I didn't.
The Warriors appear dedicated to the cause. Some players have already begun training in Tamworth.
You got to deliver, you got to perform, and it's the toughest competition in the world.
Steve Kearney confirmed Hook and Nathaniel Roach has tested negative to COVID-19. He's set to travel to Australia along with centre David Fusatua, who stayed in New Zealand for personal reasons.
He may have to go into self-isolation in the hotel room. That's obviously worst case scenario.
All 16 teams reunited for the first time in weeks for the biosecurity training.
If everyone buys into it, everyone's listening to the protocols, I think, things will run smoothly.
At Broncos headquarters, the players were asking the important questions.
It was mainly, the simple questions like, can we go to a cafe and grab a coffee?
When training begins, players will be broken up into groups of 10 or less, and no tackling will be allowed for at least the first week.
And the team that adapts the best will come out of the box really well, and the team that ends up winning the premiership will have done a hell of a job.
Training will resume on Wednesday. Michael Reddy, ABC News.
Time for the weather now, and it's another cold night ahead, Graham.
Yeah, hopefully not quite as cold as what we experienced this morning, but inland areas will be a little bit chillier than what we're expecting in Sydney. Now, there were even a few areas of light frost around Richmond this morning. Minimums there dropped to 2.6 degrees, and that's 5 degrees below the average. Frost was widespread along the slopes and ranges, although it tended a little bit patchy about the western slopes in Riverina. Braidwood, Tenterfield and Armidale all dropped to between -3.2 and -3.7. Now, the day's been mostly sunny, but low cloud has increased about parts of the coast, and that'll trigger some light showers overnight tonight and tomorrow. And that band of clouds actually set to move up the coast in a more onshore wind flow. It's going to bring the potential of those light and patchy showers or some drizzle areas. That's as a large high-pressure system slowly slides out into the Tasman Sea. Now, those wetter conditions will clear northwards through tomorrow and Wednesday, and both maximum and minimum temperatures will start to rise in a more northerly wind flow as that high begins to centre itself in the Tasman. We do have a strong cold front set to reach the southwest of the continent tomorrow afternoon, and that'll be into Perth by the evening, and possible damaging winds with that. All the other capitals apart from Sydney are expected to remain dry and mostly sunny. Now, the coastal showers are a little bit more likely anywhere north from Cronulla through to the Queensland border. The activity in the far north coast is expected to be a little bit more widespread than we're expecting further south. So in the northeast, we've got partly cloudy conditions for the coastal district. Showers more likely near the coastal fringe with a possible thunderstorm about the very far north. We'll see some frost and then a sunny day on the tablelands. Light to moderate winds on the waters with some possible thunderstorms as well. We are looking at frost along the tablelands, then partly cloudy but dry. Overnight cloud and an isolated shower along the coast should clear to a mostly sunny day. We've also got the stronger winds on the waters, mostly offshore, and that'll be mostly during the morning period. Over the inland, some areas of frost and fog in the east. We've also got a cold morning for most regions. A dry and sunny day to follow, and we are expecting to see those warmer temperatures really kick up as we move through the week. Now, southerly winds will be freshest on the morning or in the morning on the coastal waters. We're expecting minimums around 8 to 15. Our top should reach 19 to 21. Now, it'll be a partly cloudy but mostly dry day anywhere away from the coastal fringe. And we could just see an isolated light shower in the morning along the coast. For the remainder of the week, cooler and warming up, although late Sunday we see a cooler change, Juanita.
Thanks, Graham. Lee Sales is here now with 7:30.
Hello and welcome. Almost overnight, the coronavirus outbreak flipped the Australian property market. It had been growing strongly, buoyed by record low interest rates.